Today we're going to be learning Gittin Daf Samach. It's the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started right at the very bottom. Shalchule b'nei Galila l'Rabbi Chelba. So the people in the Galil sent to Rabbi Chelba the following question. Acharehen mi korim. So we have Kohen, we have Levi, first and second Aliyot. But after that, who reads? Darkei Shalom is very nice. We can make sure there's peace between people, but that's only going to help between the Kohanim, Leviim, and the Israelim. But what about the Israelim between them and themselves, amongst themselves? How are they going to come up with ways to not be upset and get into fights? Lo haba biyadi. He didn't know the answer. Ata v'shayle Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So he goes to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha and he asks him, Amarle, acharehem kolim talmidei chachamim ha'mumunim parnasim alatzibur. He says, oh, the people who are in charge of the communities, they're the ones who do it. Okay, the ones who are take on leadership roles. So now they say, okay, v'acharehen, what about after them? People who potentially could get that kind of a job. Then their children, the ones who were the leaders and took leadership roles in the community, their children. And after that, the heads of the communities, you could say, a little hard to figure out how to translate the knesiyot, the places where people gather, the leaders underneath them, and then everybody else. They now ask him another question. What about reading from a chumash? Now, what's a chumash? Rashi explains the chumash is not a book like we have of a chumash, but with one book of the Torah, but or even our books of chumashim, some have 5 books of the Torah. What it means is a Torah scroll that looks exactly like a Torah scroll with all the rules of a Torah scroll, but it's just one of the books. Can you read from that? Okay, in those days, most of their books were written on parchment, and they wrote it like a Sefer Torah. Can you use it for Torah reading? So in this case, Bnei Galil asked Rabbi Chelbo, and again, lo havi biyade, he doesn't know the answer. Ata shalei Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So he goes to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha and he asks him, lo havi biyade. This time Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha didn't know the answer. Ata shal Beit Midrashi. Go to the Beit Midrash to ask. They say, oh, well, so-and-so Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan the following thing. Sefer Torah shechasir yiriya achat ein korim bo. If a Sefer Torah is missing one piece of parchment, whereas Torah is a bunch of pieces of parchments sewed together, it's missing one, you can't read from it. And therefore, seems like here it's missing a whole lot more than just one, you shouldn't be able to read from it. But they said, Velohi, you can't really learn from here to there, from there to here, because Hata machaser b'milte, hachalom machaser b'milte. That was actually missing something. This is not missing anything. It's a complete book of the Torah. It's missing 4 books, but it's not like it's got something cut off in the middle. So you can't really learn from there. Rav Rav Yosef, now it seems at the time they didn't get an answer, but Rav and Rav Yosef both said, you can't do it because it's not respectful to the community. Now, what do you think kvod hatzibur means here? So some people say that it's that they didn't have enough money to have a whole Torah, so it's kind of an embarrassment to the community. If they don't have a whole Torah, they have to have only a part. Okay, the question is, and the commentaries grapple with, is there a way to override this? Like, let's say they really don't have it, they want to anyway, and they don't really mind, it's not kvod hatzibur, or there was a disqualified Sefer Torah, and then, so it's not that they didn't have a whole one, it's just their whole one got messed up, and then they had to fix it in the meantime. They read from something else, right? We don't really have a good answer to that, and the Rishonim and Achronim grapple with this question. Rabbi Rav Yosef Amri Travayu. Now they said another thing. Hai Sefer Aftarta Asur LeMikra b'Shabbat. You can't read from a book, which means like a piece of parchment, with the haftarot written on it. Meaning, right? Haftarot are from random prakim in Nevi'im, and then you just have a random a book, a piece of parchment with this haftarah, that haftarah, that haftarah, but it's not a book in order. You can't really have such a thing, and that's what we're going to see in a minute. And therefore, you can't read from it on Shabbat. My timer, Tiloni Tani Katev. Because this isn't the way we write books. You write all of Sefer Yirmiyahu, you write all of Sefer Yeshayahu, and then you open it up and you find the one you're looking for. The place of which chapter you're looking for within the book. So now, Mar Bar Ashi, Amar Little Chule Nami Asur. By the way, you can't even move it on Shabbat, this book, because why? My timer, because it's not. You can't read from it. So if you can't read from it, it's useless. Now, muktzah, we usually think of something that you can't do on Shabbat. It's forbidden, so it's muktzah. you can't touch something that like a pen. But that's not what muktzah really is. The real muktzah is it doesn't have a use. Those things like a pen don't have a use on Shabbat. But more muktzah than that is something that doesn't have a use at all. This book, forget about it. You can't use it on Shabbat. You really can't use it anytime. And therefore, it really has no use at all. And also, it doesn't have a use on Shabbat. But velohi. But then they say this isn't actually true. La halacha. Shari little tuleu, shari lemikrbe. You can actually carry it and you can read from it. To Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Now, how are we going to prove this? Also, we're going to take something else, but compare. They would read from Sefer Agadot. This seems to be not like a book of stories, but midrashim, like midrashay halacha and the Torah. They would learn from a book that had midrashim written down. From here, we're going to get into a very basic and interesting sugya about writing down Torah shebechtav. Are you allowed to write the oral Torah? Theoretically, you weren't really supposed to. That's why it's called the oral Torah. A lot of the sugya we're going to learn today are the basic sources for like an intro to Torah Shebaal Peh, oral Torah, and how it all works. This would be the sources you would use from today's daf. So they would read from the Haggadah Shabbat, V'halo nitan likatev, but you're not really supposed to be writing this. How could they have been using a book that wasn't supposed to be written? And then we're going to learn from here to the book of Haftarah, which has nothing to do with Torah Shebaal Peh, right? Oral Torah, it just has to do with it's something that shouldn't have been written in that way, right? Chapter here, chapter there, chapter there. Ella, kevan de lo efshal, but why did they have this book? Because at a certain point, it became not feasible to not write down the oral Torah. It was going to all get lost. And therefore, famous pasuk that's always used in this context, the time has come to do for God. And sometimes you have to break the Torah to do what seems right in the eyes of, in the name of God. So because of that, they allowed them to write down this Sefer Haggadah, and therefore they were using it. Likewise here, hachanami, kevantelo efshal, since we're not going to be able to write every single book of the prophets and then use them for Sifrei Haftarah, it's too much, right? It's too expensive, it's too much work. Therefore, so therefore we should allow the Sefer Haftarot that people have already been using, because it wasn't realistic to write down for every place that people were davening a whole parchments full of books of prophets. And therefore, we allow this. And therefore, you should be able to use it on Shabbat. You should be able to carry it on Shabbat. It shouldn't be a problem. But because, right, once you can use it on Shabbat, then, of course, you can carry it on Shabbat. Again, we're talking about carrying, being muktzah carrying, not carrying from the public to the private domain. That's all a separate problem. Abai asked Rabbi the following question. Another question about writing an incomplete Torah. Can you write part of a Torah for children to study from? Right nowadays, right, we print copies all the time of things, right? But there they were writing on parchment. Is it okay to write a part of a Torah for children to learn from? So now they say we're going to ask this question according to two different opinions. Meaning either which way you look at it, we're still going to ask the question, which is we're going to ask the question. There's a whole debate about how the Torah was written. Was it written Megillah? Was it given to the Jews part by part? Moshe got the Torah at Har Sinai, the whole section up until then. Then, as they were in the desert, he wrote section by section, sewed them all together, and ended up in the end with one Torah. Or was it given all at one time, the entire Torah at once? Okay, and then, presumably they kind of got the Torah even before everything was done, but it was written anyway. You have to think about how that works exactly. But in any case, there's this debate about was it given all in one shot or in parts. So now we're going to ask the question. It's going to be a bit of a different question according to each. Do we say, look, it was given in parts, so we can write it in parts. Or maybe we say, but in the end, it all became into one book. And maybe we can't really write it except for in one book. Even if it was given in parts, in the end, it was whole and complete. And once it was complete, we can only write a complete Torah. We also ask the question, if you say it was chatumanitna, do we say kevan de chatumanitna en kotvim? Since it was given complete, we can't write it, because we can't write it in parts, because it was given complete, we have to write it complete. Or do we say this is just unrealistic to expect anytime anybody needs anything from a chumash, from a Torah, a pasuk, we're going to learn something in school, we're going to have to write an entire Sefer Torah for it. That seems unrealistic. Amar le ein kotvim. The answer he got was, you cannot write. Okay, this is what Abai asked Rabba, and Rabba said, no, you can't write it in parts. Umatam, what's the answer? What's the reason? Meaning, is it because of Megillah Nitna, or is it Chatuma Nitna, in which, and then is it because of that or that? No, he answers Lapisha Ein Kotvin. He says, no matter how you look at it, it doesn't matter. Whether you hold Megillah, whether you hold Chatuma, either which way you can't write it. 80. Bai is now going to raise a bunch of questions against Rabba's Psa. This is talking about Heleni Amalka. You might remember this from Sotah. She made a golden plate. She gave it to the temple to have the Parashat Sotah written on it, so that when the Kohanim would, we'll see this in a minute, when the Kohanim would go to write a Megillat Sotah for a Sotah, they would have the text in front of them. So it sounds like you could write part of the text. It was written with abbreviations. It wasn't written out the whole section because you can't do that. It had abbreviations, and then the Kohen would know based on the abbreviations. But they say, what do you mean? But it says, when he would write what it said in the Tavlah. So it sounds like the whole thing was written on that block. No, explain it as it's like it was written, meaning again, it had the abbreviations, and that allowed the Kohen to be able to figure out what he was supposed to write, but only by abbreviation. He would write it in full, but he would write it like it said in the Tavlah, not exactly what it said, but like it. Ative, but continues about the question. Kashu kotev, it says in another source, when he writes, ro'eh b'tavla, he looks at the Tavlah, v'kotev mash katuv b'tavla, and he writes what it says. Mashu katuv b'tavla, mahu katuv b'tavla, what is written in this Tavlah? Now it starts to tell us. Im shachav, im lo shachav. It tells us parts of psukim. So it sounds like it wasn't abbreviations. It was really the psukim. So they answer it and they say, no. It was written in parts, meaning you would write a few words and then skip a few words, write a few words, skip a few words, or possibly write a few words in whole, and then write some abbreviations, and then write a few words. And that's, again, to avoid writing the whole section, you would do it. She did, the gold plate that she brought, or the gold block, had parts of it written out, but not the entire thing. Now they say Kittanai. This whole question is a machloket tanaim. Why? Where do we see this? Here you have it explicitly. We don't write it unless if you're planning to eventually complete a whole Sefer Torah, then you can give them part of it that you wrote to use in the meantime. So that means really you can't. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'Breshit Ador Mabul b'Torat Kohanim Abi Bayom Hashmini. You can write sections that are complete sections. Interesting how they split the sections from the creation of the world till the destruction in the flood. Right? That's one whole section because that kind of completes the world was created and the world was destroyed. From the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, which is when God speaks to Moshe, right, is they're about to have the sanctification of the temple, of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and then Vayiba Yom HaShmini, which is the 8th day of, right, then that starts a new section on the 8th day. That's when the consecration of the Mishkan happened. We're going to get back to this 8th day in a few minutes. So there you see, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can write parts, and according to the opinion before, you can't. Then we get to Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi B'nah. Torah Megillah Nitna. We're going back to this machloket. Who holds what? Rabbi Yochanan says it was Megillah. What's his proof? Shenema. Az amarti hine bati b'Megillat Sefer Katuv Alai. Okay, this is a pasuk from Tehillim where it's making a reference to the Torah and it's calling it a Megillah. Okay, which sounds like it was written in parts. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer Torah Chatuma Nitna Shenemar Lakoach et Sefer Torah Zot. Now, this is a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim at the end of the Torah. It talks about take this Sefer Torah and put it, right, to always remember, put it in the Aron, on the side of the Aron to always have it. So now it sounds like Lakoach et Sefer Torah. It sounds like it's a complete thing. So now they say, now neither of these are perfect proofs, and that's what they're going to get at now. What does each one do with the other's pasuk? Idach nami haktiv lakoach. The fact that it says lakoach and it was a whole book, well, that's after the Torah ended almost, and they put the whole book together. The idach nami haktiv, and maybe it's referring to once the Torah is complete, then take the entire thing. The idach nami haktiv b'Megillat Sefer Katuv Alai. We have two answers for this. One is just because it says Megillah is a scroll, it doesn't mean it was written in parts. The Torah in general is called a scroll. How do we know this? And in Nevuah and Zechariah it says, so he says, God said to him, well, what did you see? I see a Megillah that's flying, and the reference they're assuming is that the Megillah that he sees is the Torah, and you see the Torah is called Megillah. It has nothing to do with how it was written. It's just a name for the Torah. Or possibly called Megillah there because of Rabbi Levi, because some of it we're going to see was written on a different day. Okay, and therefore we're going to see right now that Amar Rabbi Levi Shmona Parshiot Ne'emru Bayom Shukam Bo HaMishkan. 8 Parshiot were said on the day that the Mishkan was put up, that the Mishkan was established, and we'll see why all these things. But the idea here being that it seems like these are different sections from different times, which means maybe this is why it's called Megillah, because there's different sections that were maybe together on the same day. It's a little hard to understand this perfectly, what this means and how this proves it exactly. But this seems to be proving that, right? Rashi says, Inam El Rabbi Levi, Ikr Megillah. And what they're talking about Megillah maybe is what sounds like Rashi is saying is, Otan Shmona Parshiot Shutzruchu Layom, Ne'emru V'Nechtavu V'Nimseru B'Bayom. And each one was written in its own Megillah, as they were like separate things, and then became part of the bigger Torah. Hard to see exactly what this proves. That it proves it's called the Megillah, even though it was written complete. Hard to know exactly. Anyway, let's read what he's talking about, the content of what he said. These Shmona Parshiot were all said on the day that they got the Mishkan, and why the Mishkan was put up, and we'll see why in a minute. Elohim, Parashat Kohanim, okay, all the rules for Kohanim, because the Kohanim are now working in the temple, they need to know all the rules. Parashat Leviim, which is that the Leviim were separated out, and they needed to also do the singing in the temple, so now they have a new job, they have to be up to date on what they need. Some people say it's that we give the Maaser to the Levi, but Rashi says that can't possibly be, because that didn't happen until many, many years later, once they were done in the desert and then went into the land of Israel, and 14 years passed before that happened. Doesn't make sense it would be told on that day. Parashat Tmeim, which is the people who were impure to dead bodies and needed to learn about Pesach Sheni. So here, the idea being that they have enough time to prepare because it was the first of Nisan that the Mishkan was put up, and they have 14 days to become pure. Parashat Shiluach Tmeim, which is who can't be in what section. Sarua, Zav, all these people, right, can't go into, this one can't go into Machaneh Shechina, and the Machaneh Leviyah, and the Machaneh Israel. And this is because on the day the Mishkan was set up and was operational, then we already have, there's Mishkan, here's God's presence, so now we have to define who can go into what section. Parashat Acharei Mot, because that says Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aaron, which happened on that day. So Tosfot points out that Acharei doesn't always mean immediately after, but this obviously assumes that it happened immediately after. Uparashat Shtuyei Yayin, that Kohanim can't drink when they're working in the temple. That makes a lot of sense. And Parashat Nerot, lighting the candles in the temple. And Parashat Para Aduma, because they needed to know how to purify themselves. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Torah Rov Bichtav Umiyut Al Peh. Now we're going to go back to this Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebachtav, oral, written. So according to Rabbi Elazar, most of the Torah is written, and only a minority is Baal Peh, the oral tradition. How do we know this? Proof from a pasuk, Shenemar, Echtov lo rubei Torati k'mo zal nechshav. It's pasuk from Moshe, which seems to be saying, I could write all the Torah, most of the Torah, and it's still strange to the Jewish people. They don't really keep it. But the way they understand it is, I will write the majority of my Torah, meaning, right, they may not keep it, but the point is the majority of my Torah is written rather than oral. Rabbi Yochanan amar rov al peh umiyut bichtav. Most of it is oral, and a minority of it is written. Okay, shenemar ki al pi hadvarim ha'elu. This is a pasuk that actually mentions both. We'll get back to that in a minute. It's in Shemot Lamed Daled, and God says to Moshe, "Tov lecha hadvarim ha'elu." Write down these things. Ki al pi hadvarim ha'elu karati itcha brit Yisrael. Because I made a covenant. Al pi means by the mouth, by the words, the oral Torah, I made a brit with the oral Torah. So now if God's making a covenant on the oral Torah, not the written Torah, then it must be the oral Torah is much greater. The debate, by the way, what we mean by oral Torah. Does written Torah include also drashot on the written Torah? Because otherwise it's really hard to say that the written Torah is greater than the oral Torah. Anyway, there's a debate about exactly what to define as written Torah according to this source. So now what's the difference whether the majority is this or the majority is that? That's also a good question. V'idach nami, so now we're going to go, what does each one do with the other pasuk? Idach nami hachtiv, echtov lo rubi torati. So there's the answer. Ahu atmoi kamitame, it's a question. Echtov lo rubi torati alo k'mazar nechshavu. It's like, if I were to write you the majority of my Torah, would you still wouldn't keep it. So now it's saying, right, not that I wrote the majority of the Torah is written, it's just saying, if I were to write the majority of the Torah, would you still, what would be the point? Because you still don't really keep it. The brit was the covenant was given on the oral Torah specifically because it's much harder to learn. So because of that, they needed specifically a covenant on that part. So now Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani explains, right, with the Metorgaman, Rabbi Yehuda, he was the Metorgaman of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Tiv tov lecha tadvarim ha'ele, uchtiv ki al pi advarim ha'ele, ha'ketzad. Very confusing. God says, write this down, and then he says, but there's the oral. So what does this mean? Is it oral? Is it written in the Torah? How does this work? Very famous statement. Things that are written, you can't say them by heart. You can't recite them. You have to read them from inside. Okay? Big debate if this is coming from that pasuk. Does it mean it's a Torah law or is it a rabbinic law? Right? It doesn't sound like it's really such a bad thing. Anyway, according to this, if it's written, you have to read it as it's written. That's because we're very careful about every letter in the Torah and we can darshan so many things. And if you don't read it, you won't really see those things, or you might say them wrong, right? When you say things by heart, you don't exactly quote them properly. And this is a much bigger thing, which is anything that's oral, you're not allowed to write them down. Okay, now that's a big deal because again, our oral Torah is now written down, and that was what we saw before. That at a certain point they had no choice. The Rambam claims that even in those days they used to write it down, but only the big rabbis would write it down. They would keep it for notes for themselves, but they wouldn't let the common people see it, because what's the problem with writing things down? First of all, you don't always understand things when you read them. Now, it's true you don't always understand things when you pass them down orally. Okay, that's part of the problem with having so many different opinions of what he said and what he said, and I said he said this, and you said he said that, and we have that all over the Gemara. But there's an opportunity to explain things properly. Whereas when things are written, you can't necessarily explain them properly. And therefore, and it's also, you want to have things open to interpretation. So you need things open into interpretation. Once you write them, it's very hard to interpret them in different ways. So anyway, there's a lot more to be said about this, and why and what, but I'm going to leave that for now because we're not in what I would say the intro class to Torah Shabbal Peh. It's more a place for somewhere like that, or like a regular Shiur B'iyun, and try to understand this a lot better and see all the different opinions about why this is. And then again, why they decided they had to do it. And that's more clear because things were getting forgotten and messed up, and the tradition was breaking, and they had to save the tradition. And this is also interesting in terms of realizing that sometimes halacha has to be overridden because of situation, right? So it's just a question, who decides that and how it gets decided, and who accepts it from the people who decided it. Always very complicated. So now they say, Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, ele. A different way of getting to the same answer is from the word ele. Ele takotev, ia takotev halachot. When it says, pitov lechat advarim ha'ele, it means write only these things and not things that are oral. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo karat Kadosh Baruch Hu brit im Israel ela b'shvil dvarim shabal peh. Rabbi Yochanan said the whole covenant was really only on the Torah shabal peh, as we said. Why is that? Shenemar ki apiyat dvarim ha'elu karati itcha brit ve'et Yisrael. Right? He's saying because that's what it says here. The brit was only on the oral Torah. We saw that before, and therefore the brit is only on that. Now, why would he be doing this? It's possible he's trying to strengthen the oral tradition, because again, you have to remember it was complicated in those days. There were all these different sects and people who were not accepting the oral Torah and the oral tradition of the rabbis. And they were trying to strengthen their oral tradition and saying, this is the truth and it's so important. That was the covenant between us and God. It was on the oral Torah. And then obviously it's a big debate. What is the oral, right? There's a lot of opinions and different opinions about the oral Torah, but he's saying about against the people like the Karaites who didn't believe in the oral Torah or the same oral Torah and had a different rabbinic tradition, or didn't have any, right? Took the Torah much more literally. And that was really going on in those days. So it might make sense why he's strengthening the value, and saying the covenant was on this. Like there is no covenant without the oral Torah. Okay, that's it for that super interesting section. Now we're moving on to Marvim B'bayit Yasham Mipnei Darkei Shalom. So the Mishnah had said we put the Eruv, we keep it in the house it's been in because of ways of peace. So why is that? My timer. If it's that it would be a lack of respect. It's been in my house all this time, and now all of a sudden you're taking it away. It's not respectful to me. Well, hahu shipura. Okay, shipura, there's two different interpretations. Either it means a shofar mamash, the shofar of that they would blow on Friday afternoons, or to tell people Shabbat was starting, or maybe it's shipura or shofarot are tzedakah boxes, and it was where they collected the tzedakah for the community and divvied out the tzedakah. So it was Havami Ikara Be Rav Yehuda. It was in Rav Yehuda's house. Then Rav Yehuda died. And then what they do, Levaself Be Rabba. They moved it to the next. Now it's going to go basically from Rosh Hashiva to Rosh Hashiva. So first Rav Yehuda, then Rabba. Levaself Be Rav Yosef. After Rabba came Rav Yosef. Levaself Be Abaye. After him Abaye took over. Ulevaself Be Rava. So here you see they passed it from house to house, and it wasn't like an embarrassment to the house that's no longer there. Now you could say this is a little different. He died, and that's why they moved it. One could definitely argue that. But in any case, we're going to say it's a different reason. Ela mishum chashada. It's not out of respect. It's lack of respect. And when people won't respect that person anymore, it's because we're worried people will suspect. What will people suspect? So good question. Rashi says the suspicion is that we're worried that people will say, oh, they'll come into the house, they won't see an Eruv, and they'll say, oh my goodness, all these people are carrying without an Eruv, because they're used to the Eruv being there. So I can't believe all the people in this courtyard are carrying without an Eruv. Tosfot says that no, the concern is that he quotes Rabbeinu Hananel. He says that people are going to think that maybe they moved it out of my house because I was stealing the food and I was eating it myself. And that's why. And then he said, and therefore he distinguishes between this case and the shofar case. In the shofar case, everybody knew why it was moved because the Rosh Hashiva was the one in charge of giving out the charity to everybody. So it makes sense it would have to move to his house. But if there was no good reason, then people could think that you were maybe stealing the Eruv food and eating it for yourself. Okay. Bor shaya karov lama. Moving on to the next case in the Mishnah, and we'll start and finish this case today. So if there's a bore near the channel of water, the person closest, right, the person with the water pit closest to the channel gets to fill up their cistern with water. Now, Itmar. There's a machlokah between Tanaim about something maybe similar. We'll see how it connects. B'nei Nahara, if there's people who live in a city with a river going through. Rav Amar, now the question is, let's say there's not enough water from the river to water all the fields in the city. So who gets first? Rav Amar, tatai shatumaya beresha. Now water stream goes downstream. So streams downhill. So basically the people at the bottom of the hill get first according to Rav. We'll see why in a minute. Ushmuel Amar, Eli shatumaya beresha. Shmuel says it's the people at the top, closer to where the stream is coming from, starts from, who get the water first. So now they say, if the water's streaming and it just goes, and from the stream, basically everything gets watered, or, it's just everyone kind of takes water from the stream as it goes downhill, and nobody disagrees. Everyone can take, it's whoever comes first can get. But question is, can you create a dam, like a water channel, to go from the field, right, from the river, into your fields and basically divert the water into your field? So now Shmuel Amar Eli Shatumaya Beresha. Yes, the upper ones can first channel water to their field before it gets down to the bottom, even if it might cause a loss to the people at the bottom. Why is that? In other words, in this case, it's not that the water can go downstream and everyone can get water equally from there. It's a case where the question is, can people channel water off or not? And if so, who can? So Shmuel says that the first people get first dibs. They say we're closer to the root of the water, so we get it first. Rav Amar tatai shatumaya beresha da'amrei nahara kepashteleza. Says the bottom people get it first because they say, look, if it just goes straight downstream, it's going to get to us. And therefore, if you're going to take it off, then if you're going to take some water from there and the water's not going to get to us, that's not fair, because you're changing something that's going to, if you didn't change anything, the water would get to us. And now that you're taking water for yourselves, that's preventing us from getting the water the way it would stream naturally. So it should go its natural route, and that will end up at the bottom. So there's a big debate, top or bottom. So let's see what happens. Then they say, Tana. Okay, first of all, the Mishnah says, let's go back to our Mishnah. Bor karov lama, the bor that's closest to the water channel, mitmalei bishon, neidarkei shalom. So there's an order. It's the person who's closest. So wouldn't that seem to say Shmuel? So Tirgum Shmuel alibe Rav. It's always nice when they do this. Says, well, I'll explain Rav. Okay, even though he disagrees with Rav, it must be that the mission is ba'amah metalechet al pibolo. It must be that the channel already has an exit right toward the bore, that the water naturally goes into that person's bore before it flows downhill, in which case, again, it's taking its natural course. And then even Rav would agree that you would be able to fill your bore. So ihachi ma'ila, but then there's no chiddush in the Mishnah. It's obvious. If the water's going its natural way, of course the person whose bore fills up gets it because he's closest and it's going to fill up his bore first, his cistern. So they say, well, maybe the people of the town could say, you might have thought, listen, block up your bore, cut off, the fact that the water is going into your channel. It has a little, the channel has a little out that goes into your bore naturally. Close that up so that you don't take water away from us. The Mishnah teaches you don't have to do that. Now, what's this hint of that? It's a good question. There's a lot of different opinions about it. Some people say that it go equally or some other word, but basically the idea being that somehow you would think that maybe they could say, this is unfair and you should be able, you should cut off your area, your bore. And the answer is no. If it flows naturally there, you can keep it there. And that's how Rav would have to understand the Mishnah. Because again, Rav's whole theory is let it take its natural course. Next. Amar Rav Huna bar Tachlifa. Now, Rav Huna bar Tachlifa, first of all, you have to know that there's a rule that in general, when it comes to monetary issues, we paskin like Shmuel. When it comes to Isser v'Heter issues, we paskin like Rav. So this is a monetary issue. You would think we paskin like Shmuel. And that's why this line is a little strange. And that's why Rashi and Tosfot both say it must be this person didn't hold, we hold like Shmuel when it comes to Dini Mamona, monetary issues, because otherwise it would be obvious. He wouldn't say what he said. But now we're going to hear what he says. Since they didn't paskin, not like Rav and not like Shmuel, well, kol da'alim gvar. This is a fascinating line. Kol da'alim gvar means whoever's strongest wins. So basically, it's a free-for-all. And whoever gets the water first, meaning you make you divert the water to you, you can get it. If you're the bottom people and you take the water first, you have rights to it because you could say, look, the water will flow naturally to me anyway, and I get the water. So what is this? It's a free-for-all mean. Like, what does it mean, kol da'alim gvar? Kol da'alim gvar means whoever's the strongest wins. So when I studied with Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, he used to, I remember very distinctly this distinction he made. He said there's different ways to look at it. I think he said more than two, but the two that strike me that I remember very clearly were, one is that in survival of the fittest, right? Who usually wins out? The stronger one. And it's like what he used to call chok jungle. It's like leave things to nature. And, we use it in a case where we just don't know what's the right answer. Like here, we don't know to paskin like Shmuel, we don't know to paskin like Rav. So just pick up our hands, let go, and whatever naturally happens will happen. And usually it's the strongest person who wins, or, not always physically strong, but the most assertive, the most aggressive, they're the ones who are going to get it. Another option is to explain, and this is where he was explaining options, among the Rishonim and Achronim of how they understood this, is to say that the one who's the strongest is usually the one who's the most assertive about it is probably the one who's in the right. And it's a way to find the truth. Because whoever really is naturally, and here it's a little hard to say. In other cases, maybe it makes more sense. Here it's just, we don't really know who has first rights to it. But in a lot of cases, other cases, it makes a little more sense to say this, which is, there's an argument between two people. We don't know who's right. Probably whoever really cares is the one who's going to push the most to get it done his way to win. Because, the other one is just trying to gain something that wasn't theirs, but the other one is trying to keep something that really is theirs. And then maybe they'll fight harder for it. And it's a way of actually getting to the truth. So the question is it a way of getting to the truth? Or is it just, we have no idea what the truth is and we're just going to leave it to the wind? So that's a very interesting term that we're going to meet a number of other times. Rav Shimi bar Ashi ata l'kamed Abai. Shimi bar Ashi comes for Abai. Interesting story, very crazy story. And he says to him the following. Okay, it has a lot of interesting elements to it. Amar le ili yidana ledidi. Do you have any time to learn with me? Sorry, I skipped a word. Sorry. Amar le lot ben mar bi'idana. Sorry. He says, sit with me. I want to learn with you. Amar le, make time for me. Amar le, eat li idana ledidi. I only have time for my learning. Like I spend my time doing my own learning. I have to review the stuff I've been learning. I'm sorry, I don't have time to learn with you. You can imagine the scene. He says, what about at night? I see you're learning during the day, but maybe you can learn with me at night. Amar le, I have to water my fields at night. Okay, I learn during the day, but I have to do my work at night. Amar le, ana mashkina le lamar, maya biyamama. The lot mamar belelia. He says, you know what? I'll water your fields during the day, and we'll learn at night. So Amar le lachaya. He says, great. I'm happy not to have to deal with watering my fields. Perfect. Little did he know what Rav Shimi bar Ashi was going to do. Well, Azali Eli. So Rav Shimi bar Ashi takes this into his own hands. Now, with Abaya's field seems to be, it was in the middle. Okay, not at the top, not at the bottom. So what does he do? Azali Eli, he went to the people at the top of the town, where the river was coming. Amar lehu tatai shatumaya bereisha. He says, listen, we hold like Rav, who says the bottom people get it first, so you can't take the water for yourselves first. Azali tatai goes to the people at the bottom. Amar lehu Eli shatumaya bereisha. He says, we pass them like Shmuel. The upper people get it, so you can't take the water first. So basically, I get the water first. Adahachi sachar mischar v'ashke. So what did he do? He put a little channel into Abaya's fields, and he watered the fields. Well, you think Abaya liked this or didn't like it? You'll see. Ki ata l'kamed Abaya. When he got back to Abaya, Amar le, and he told him what he did, he was so proud of himself. Amar le, right? We don't know if he told him, but presumably he told him, or Abaya found out from the neighbors in the bad way. He says to him, "You did to me like two people. You have like Rav and Shmuel." And what is this mess that you did? Right? That's not appropriate. Below ta'imnu Abai lepere dahushata. He wouldn't eat any of the fruits that grew in his field that year to show that he felt that he was stealing from everybody else, and he wouldn't eat the fruits of his field. What he did with them, I don't know, huge waste, but whatever. Now, the point is, very interesting. Question is, I should say, why did Abai react that way? Was it really wrong what he did? Because in the end, we don't hold like Rav or Shmuel, and it's free for all, as we said. So either, right, you have to say, either it really was a free for all, and he really could have done it. And it was just that Abai didn't like it, right? First of all, Abai was getting flack from other people, and maybe it's what you call midah chasidut. He wanted to be at a higher level and not to be the bully who, uses his strength or his intellect in this case, right? His smart wits to get what he wants. That's one possibility. Another possibility is really maybe either we hold like Shmuel and he couldn't have done that. Also, some people say, because he was in the middle, nobody says the middle. Rav says the bottom people, Shmuel says the top people, and the middle, actually, according to no opinion, are supposed to get. So he was doing kind of a non-opinion. Anyway, there's a huge debate about the story, about what really, was he right? Was he wrong? Anyway, was Abai's reaction correct? Or was it just, was he being extra machmir? Anyway, very interesting story. Or maybe did it just look bad for him? But here's what you get when you let someone do your work. You have to be careful because you never know how they're going to do it. And they might not do it in the way that you would approve of, which is, it's always hard to delegate for this reason. But anyway, very interesting story. There's a lot you can take out of it. And even just the beginning part about it, the whole learning thing, was it right for Abai to say, I'm not going to learn with you? Like that's also, maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe that was part of why Rav Shimi, maybe he didn't like his response, like, oh, I'm too busy, I can't learn with you. Anyway, interesting food for thought. And with one last story, Hanu Bey B'nei Bey Charmach, city of Charmach, the Azul Karu Beresha. They were the sons of Bey Charmach. I think that's not the city, I think it was B'nei Bey, no, maybe they were the sons in the city of Charmach, whatever it was a group of people. Azul Karu Beresha, the Shanvat. They dug they made a channel to get the water to go to their fields from the Shinvata, which comes out of the Euphrates, the Nahar Prat. So they basically made a little channel that comes out, goes around their fields, and then back to the Nahar, back to the river. Now the people where the water was upstream, meaning when it's coming down there into where they dammed it kind of and had it go around, come to Abai and started complaining. Amrule, Kamakil and Naharin. The fact that he did this is causing all our fields to get ruined. Now, why is it ruining the fields? So presumably Rashi explains, again, there's a whole bunch of different ways of understanding everything about the story. But Rashi says what happened was it slowed down the stream of the water. And because it slowed down the stream of the water, the people who were upstream, it flooded their fields and ruined their fields. Dig deeper into the, under the river, dig deeper, and the water will flow quicker. But then the people who made the the channel to go through around their fields said, but now the water's not coming to us because it's flowing so quickly, right? What happens is when you dig the water will be deeper, the current will be quicker, and it'll flow downstream quicker. But then it wasn't going through their diversion that they created, and their plants, their fruits were dry. So now it's unclear who he's talking to. Rashi says you should close up your dam that you did and that whole thing that you did, right? You have no rights to this, really. Tosfa quotes Rabbeinu Hananel. He actually goes with Rashi in the end, but he quotes Rabbeinu Hananel, who said he was saying it to the upper people, which meant, right, again, he said, the words he said are, Sliku nafshai mahatam, just, there's nothing you could do. Since, as we said before, there's chok jungle, anyone can do what they want, whoever's strongest wins, well, they have rights to do this dam, so there's nothing we can really do about it. Okay, and then, just want to see, I think there's also a different explanation about the pero drying. One second. It could be, the fruits drying where the people where we're upstream, that if it goes so quickly that it actually won't water our fields properly. Okay, and that's a problem. Anyway, it could be them, it could be the other people. There's a lot of lack of clarity here. And in general, in the sugya, there's a lot of lack of clarity because we have these two opinions and we don't know who to hold by, and we have this kol dal vav, and we're left with a lot of confusion about what exactly is supposed to be done. Okay, so quick review of today's daf. We started with the questions that the Bnei Galil asked Rabbi Chel, but he didn't know answers to, about who reads after Kohen and Levi, who gets the aliyot, and we had, can you read from a book that's not complete? Can you write a book that's not complete? Can you write a sefer haftarot? Can you write books for kids for school, right, that are not complete books of Torah? Do we allow this because we have no choice, right? Is that okay or not? Was the Torah written Megillah? Was the Torah written as a complete book? Does this have ramifications on that question? Then we got to the whole thing about Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is greater, and what's the distinction between them, that written things can't be recited by heart, and oral things can't be written down, other than the fact that they changed that over time. And then we had the Eruv, that you can't move the Eruv because of Darkei Shalom. We had Chashad, we had Rashi and Tosfot with two different interpretations. What were worried people would be suspicious about? And then we moved on to this whole confusing thing about the water channel. Can you channel water off? Can you not? Who has first dibs? The top people, the bottom people, or maybe nobody, and whoever gets it first wins. So, and with those stories also, which made it even more a little bit unclear, because the stories themselves weren't very clear how to read them. With that, we'll finish for today, maybe adding to our oral Torah tradition coming down that without someone to explain what exactly happened in these stories, right, the fact that it's written is a little bit confusing and we don't really know. Maybe that's why these stories come right after saying you shouldn't write things down, because look, when you write things down, there's a lot of lack of clarity, and without the oral tradition, we don't really know how to understand these stories. That's just kind of a little bit of a joke. It's not, I don't think that's really why it's here, but it does enter in my mind that we were just talking about how unclear things are. When they're written, you don't really have the explanation behind it. And these stories clearly happen a particular way, but we're not sure anymore about what the details are. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a great day. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.